What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in yesterday's video, I went through some of my favorite mid-round running back targets. Today, I'm going to be going through some of my favorite wide receiver targets. So we're looking in like the round 4 through 8 range, kind of like this mid-round range. And I think there's a lot of really solid value at the wide receiver position. In yesterday's video, I kind of talked about how I thought there were very few running back options, but because running backs are being pushed so far up in drafts, there's going to be a lot of value at the wide receiver position. So if you can lock down your running backs round 2, round 1, round 3, don't know why I said it in that order, round 1, round 2, round 3, then you can really stack your wide receivers in the middle rounds. And I think specifically there's a lot of value with some young players. So guys in like year 3, year 2, even, a rookie or 2 in here. So we're going to break down 5 wide receivers in this video. And then I'm using a 4 for 4 ADP. Basically, it just combines a bunch of different platforms to kind of create like a consensus ADP. So it's a mix of super serious leagues, more casual platforms, all that sorts of stuff. But let's jump into the first wide receiver, and it is going to be Marquise Brown. And I actually made a video earlier in the offseason saying that Marquise Brown was a do not draft, but that was looking at underdog ADP where he was going at like the 3-4 turn. According to 4 for 4 ADP, Marquise Brown is the wide receiver 21 going in the mid-5th round. So that is a very big difference. Marquise Brown actually had a really solid season with the Ravens last year. He actually saw, a nice combination of big playability and security. He was 12th in target share, 8th in deep targets. His overall finish didn't look insane because, Lamar went down with injury. They had Huntley playing. He did not perform well with Huntley at quarterback. But in the games with Lamar Jackson as the starter, Marquise Brown was balling out. So in 11 games, he averaged 16.7 PPR points per game. Very, very strong production. Like if we remember, I think like going into week 12, 13, like Marquise Brown was looked at as a fantasy, fringe wide receiver 1. If you took that 16.7 point per game number, that would have been the wide receiver 11 in points per game. So he was performing very well as the Ravens wide receiver 1. On an offense that isn't typically, supposed to produce stud wide receiver production. But now he gets traded to the Cardinals. He is reunited with Kyler Murray. And I think there are some clear kind of pros and cons here with this landing spot. I actually think Marquise Brown is going to pair very well with Kyler Murray. We know Marquise Brown, has his big play moments down the field. He's super solid, with the deep ball passes. And if we look at, the upgrade going from Lamar to Kyler Murray in terms of the deep ball, it's a pretty stark difference. So just looking at a few different metrics, in terms of deep ball accuracy rating, Lamar Jackson ranked 14th last season, Kyler Murray was 3rd. In deep ball catchable pass rate, Lamar was 20th, Kyler was 5th. Deep ball completion percentage, Lamar was 20th, Kyler was 1st. So it's not even like Lamar Jackson wasn't a great deep ball thrower. He was pretty much league average. It's just that Kyler Murray was an absolute stud. Like in those metrics, 3rd, 5th, 1st. Kyler Murray will be able to get the ball to Marquise Brown. And, for at least the first 6 weeks of the season, Marquise Brown is going to be the locked and loaded wide receiver 1. We know that DeAndre Hopkins has a 6-game suspension. I do think it's a possibility that Marquise Brown can kind of overtake DeAndre Hopkins. D-Hop is getting a little bit older. I still think he has some juice left in the tank, but we really haven't seen Marquise Brown in a great situation. I think this will be a really strong start for him, especially early on in the season. So I think he's a guy who can give you like high-end wide receiver 2 production through 6 weeks. And then even if, him and D-Hop are kind of splitting the top opportunities, I still think he can be like a back-end wide receiver 2 in your lineup. So if you're drafting him here in like the mid-5th round, wide receiver 21, I just think that's a really strong price. I think he matches up really well with Kyler Murray, and I do think he has some upside even if DeAndre Hopkins is on the field. So he's going to be my first mid-round wide receiver. Then we're going to move into these pretty young wideouts, starting it off here with Darnell Mooney. He's been drafted as the wide receiver 30, a late 6th round pick. He's the wide receiver 1 on an offense. And not only is he the wide receiver 1, but I mean, like, this Bears offense just looks brutal, especially the pass catchers. Like, there is nothing going on in this wide receiver room. There's no one who can even come close to competing with him, for the number 1 spot. So he was solid last year, was the wide receiver 31 in points per game, 12.9 PPR points per game. So basically you're drafting him where he finished last year. And I just think there's, a few spots to expect improvement in. First off, he's going into year 3. He should just be a better player overall. Also, last year, the Bears' offense was just a mess. You had Matt Nagy there. This whole unit just looked terrible. And I don't think they're going to take like a massive jump. Obviously, the offensive unit in terms of personnel is still really rough, but I just think it's going to be, a more well-functioning unit. I expect the coaching staff to be much more competent here in 2022. And so I think Darnell Mooney's a guy who offers you a lot of security just in terms of volume. Like, he is going to be the number one target. There's really no debating that. So I feel like, I can't really see him finishing much lower than this wide receiver 30 spot. But if he has that just locked in volume, I think this is a spot where he also has some hidden upside. If he can just kind of hit on a little bit of efficiency and get into the end zone maybe a few more times more than expected, I think he's a super strong pick here in the late 6th round. And now moving over to a second-year wide receiver, we have Rashod Bateman. He's basically going right after Darnell Mooney. He's here at wide receiver 31 at the 6-7 turn. And I actually think Mooney and Rashod Bateman have a lot of similarities. They're like these young wide receivers who are lined up to be number ones in like subpar wide receiver rooms. So I talked about Marquise Brown, right? He was the Ravens wide receiver 1, now going to the Cardinals. You have Rashod Bateman stepping up. And I was a big Rashod Bateman fan when he was coming out of college. I still think he can be a stud in the NFL. So I'm really excited to see him get this opportunity. He didn't really do anything crazy as a rookie, averaged 8.6 PPR points per game. I don't really think he had like the best opportunity. He missed the first 5 games of the season with a groin strain, but not only did he miss those games, he got injured in the preseason, so he was missing, valuable reps with his quarterback. You had Lamar Jackson go down with injury down the stretch. This offense was just not the same. So I don't think he really got a fair shake as a rookie. I think the talent is there. They really have not brought in much competition. Like right now, it's kind of strange that he's just set up to be so clearly the number one, considering he really hasn't had like any consistent or solid NFL production. So I feel like they must feel pretty confident that he can be at least the wide receiver 1 on their team. I don't think they're going to be as pass heavy as they were last year, but I don't think we need that here at like wide receiver 31. You're not drafting someone to be like a top 15 guy. Do I think he has that ceiling? I mean, potentially. We saw what Marquise Brown did early on in the season last year, just like Darnell Mooney, right? Like, I think he's going to get there with the volume. The question is, like, does he just get fortunate with touchdowns to kind of take that next step? But in this, like, wide receiver 30 range, we're looking at some, like, other unproven wide receivers and maybe worse situations, maybe some veteran guys who have never shown a ceiling. I'd rather take a shot on the young guy who I think can have a massive breakout season. And I'm going to be taking a shot on another young second-year wide receiver, and that is going to be Elijah Moore. It's honestly strange to me why Elijah Moore is going as the wide receiver 35, a late 7th round pick. Like, this is a fringe wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 price tag, and I just do not really understand it. So Elijah Moore didn't really have a breakout until later on in his 2021 season. He didn't really have like a stable snap share until week 9, but once he got that locked in snap share, I mean, the dude balled out. So from week 9 to week 13, these were his snap shares. So 60%, 56%, 67, 88, and then 86. So 3 of those weeks, like, that's decent. It was a jump from his previous weeks, but that's not even like clear-cut wide receiver 1 numbers. We saw the 88% and the 86% in his last 2 games. But so in those 5 weeks, he averaged 20.1 PPR points per game. Like, this dude was a set it and forget it in your lineup. He was looked at as a top 24 guy. He basically had like the Amon-Ra stretch before Amon-Ra did. Unfortunately, injury kept him out for the rest of the season, so he didn't play after that week 13 game. But it kind of seems like people just forget that he went on that run. Heading into 2022, I know they did draft Garrett Wilson, but I still think this is a situation where he has earned the right to be the wide receiver 1. He's going to have that high snap share from week 1. I think this Jets offense really can take a jump. I talked about it yesterday when I went through Breece Hall. Like, this is a really young unit. They have a solid offensive line. Zach Wilson can take a jump. They have a lot of young weapons. So right now, Elijah Moore is slotted in as the wide receiver 1 on this roster. So here in like the late 7th round, I'd much rather take a swing on a young wide receiver. And I really think he's going to outperform this ADP pretty solidly. I think that after the 2022 season, like Elijah Moore is going to be locked in as a top 24 guy. And so I'm willing to buy in kind of at a discount here just because I guess we haven't seen a full year of production. But I think he's going to blow this like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 ADP out of the water. And I think he's really going to set himself up to be like a mid tier wide receiver 2 heading into 2023. And now moving on to the fifth and final mid round wide receiver target, it is going to be Drake London, the rookie wide receiver out of USC. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 38, a mid 8th round pick. I really feel like there's going to be a huge discrepancy in his ADP. So in more serious leagues, he's going to be going way earlier than this. In, less serious leagues, more casual kind of platforms, more casual leagues, he'll probably be going later than this price. I just think at this point, we have to understand that rookie wide receivers are producing from day one, or maybe not day one, but like in year one. We've seen a ton of guys be super fantasy relevant over the last 2 seasons, and not even just like fantasy relevant, but like really strong wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 plays in your lineup. So just kind of running through some guys over the past 2 seasons. We've had Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle. You had Amon-Ra go on that crazy run down the stretch. Even like Elijah Moore, I talked about, had that 5-game run. And then you had guys like Justin Jefferson. Brandon Ayuk was really strong as a rookie. And I'm even leaving off like guys like CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, who were solid, but they weren't like, wide receiver 2 options. You weren't like super excited to have them in your lineup. But those are a ton of names. Drake London, got elite draft capital, super solid production in college. This Falcons wide receiver room is wide open. It's going to be Drake London, Kyle Pitts. This offense is not going to be good, but I still think Drake London can kind of overcome it. We saw Kyle Pitts was really solid last year. Didn't get the touchdowns, but did everything else. Feel like Drake London can be the same. All around super solid wide receiver. There's just very little risk with drafting him here at wide receiver 38, but if he hits, I feel like he can be like a back end wide receiver 2 on your team. So if he's like your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, I feel like you're setting yourself up pretty well, and that's a very realistic possibility here if you're getting him in the 8th round. So those are my 5 mid-round wide receiver targets: Marquise Brown, Darnell Mooney, Rashod Bateman, Elijah Moore, and then Drake London. Pretty young players. I kind of feel like that's where the value is. We're expecting them to take that jump instead of kind of drafting some of these older guys where you're kind of going off where they were last year, floor options. I'd rather take these players who are going to improve. I believe that these guys are all very talented and can improve, and ball out in their current situations. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know what you guys think about these mid-round targets. You think these guys are solid values? Are you avoiding them? Let me know down below in the comment section, and I'll get back to every single person. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you guys in the next one.